Joining us now, Republican incumbent Congressman from the 1st District of Virginia, Dr. Rob Wittman, and he's running for another term. He's also chairman of the all-powerful Sea Power Subcommittee. And this election, as you know, the midterm's 11 days away. It'll be determined on November the 6th. There's early voting has started in Virginia, so don't be shy. Get out there, do your part. And if you want to get involved, go to taxcutswork.com. Lots of things that you're going to be able to do. But this is a very exciting time. Republicans are coming back. All the signs are showing Republicans gaining. We're going to have a new economic report, GDP numbers coming out today at about 8:30 a.m. Democrats shaking in their boots. They don't want to see these good numbers. They don't know what they're going to do, how they're going to respond to it. I just had a caller earlier trying to tell me this is the Obama economy. It's like talking to people that work at the Onion. I mean, you got to be kidding me. Joining me now, though, is Rob Wittman. Congressman, good to have you with us, sir.
Good morning, John. It's great to be with you.
Oh, wow. We got a lot to talk about today. We'll get to politics in a minute, Congressman Wittman. Let's get to policy. Let's start with the Caravan, 1,000 miles away. The president said, I don't think so. We're going to have to do something to stop them. Here's the problem. The loopholes in our laws are so porous that basically if any illegal steps 1 foot a toe over the border, there's conflicting laws. Number one, they've come here legally, so they've broke that law. But if they simply say asylum, then we can't do anything. We can only apprehend them for 20 days. Then they get released, and they get a piece of paper, and they disappear into the interior of the country. Mm-hmm. So what's happening now is 95% of those that are coming over the border don't go back. And so the hands are tied. But now the president's saying, I'm going to put 1,000 troops there. What is going on here, Rob?
Well, John, as you know, there's the problems with our existing law. If somebody from Mexico tries to come across the border, they're apprehended, and they can be immediately deported. So they'll do a quick hearing to determine if they claim asylum. They do a quick hearing, and if their claim isn't valid, but if they come from Central America, the law says this, that they cannot immediately deport them. As you know, the ports of entry there are overwhelmed. We've seen about 1,000 a day coming across. They're overwhelmed, so they can't immediately give a hearing to them for asylum. So they give them a piece of paper that says, call the immigration court, make an appointment to go in. Some of them are given an ankle bracelet, some are not. Some are transported to the interior parts of our country. They're dropped off there and said, by the way, contact the immigration court. We know that 85% plus of those individuals never contact the court, never show up for a hearing, and therefore are in the country. And they know that. That's one of the, I think, drawing points for this caravan is folks said, hey, and as you know, when they come across the border, if they're from Central America, they're looking for a Border Patrol agent because they know they're going to be picked up. They know that the immigration courts are overwhelmed. They know they're going to be transported someplace, given a slip of paper, and that's their entry into the country. This catch and release is just the most unreasonable way to go about an immigration system. It just doesn't make sense, or it's completely devoid of reason in how you would do that. So that's got to change. The laws have to change. And I think that's one of the drawing cards for people to come here is to say, hey, we're going to take advantage of that system, and they are. We see that right now. Now, what the president can do is to say we're going to work with Mexico, and I think Mexico has been very cooperative to say, no, listen, we want these people from Central America to stay in Mexico and apply for political asylum. And as you know, the standards there have to be met, and the standards there are pretty high. But the problem is they have to get to a hearing before an immigration judge to even do that through the legal pathways. And remember, the military's role at the border is limited. The military is going to be there in a supportive role to the National Guard, which is also there in a supportive role to the Border Patrol agents. So what they're going to try to do is to make sure there's not chaos there. These people need to come to a port of entry in order to pursue immigration legally, and that's what they need to do. And this is just to make sure that we are not having chaos there at the border.
So what happens if they don't do that? So you've got right now, we have understood, Congressman Wittman, it's up to 13,000 people. I mean, that's a lot of people to try to deal with, all bum rushing the border at one time. So you deploy 1,000 troops, you have your National Guard, but what are they going to do? I mean, if they want to come over and just step over the border, there's no wall. So how do you stop it?
Well, that's where Mexico comes in. Mexico has to be working to process these people in Mexico, because just as you pointed out, if they come across the border, the way the laws are written is, they have to be issued a notice of how they pursue political asylum, either have to be processed there on the border, and once they come across, the policy of catch and release is the law of the land. So I know that the Secretary of Homeland Security, working with other federal agencies, are trying to, as well as Mexico, are working to say, listen, we want to make sure these individuals do not come across the border, or make sure that they are processed properly through a port of entry. So that's the way that you can prevent this. If they come across the border, you're right. I mean, you talk about chaos. I mean, they're coming over at a rate of about 1,000 per day today. Mm-hmm. But if you have this mass influx of people there on the border, that just creates, again, more chaos. So, the Secretary of Homeland Security is trying to make sure that this proceeds in an orderly fashion. Have people pursue the proper means under the existing law if they're making these claims of political asylum, and that's what they are doing to try to gain entry into the United States.
So there's two questions here, Congressman Wittman. The first you've answered, which is how to stop this caravan that is coming now. And I think what I've heard is the Mexican authorities have to get involved in this, because without that, there is going to be a sense of chaos there. So let's go to the longer-term solution. You mentioned that there are loopholes in our immigration laws. Going forward after this caravan to stop a second caravan that could be 100,000 people, what has to get changed? When you get back to work there, what laws do you have to get rid of or change? What do you have to do in order to stop this in the future?
Well, John, first of all, I think you have to make the policies the same for anybody that comes to the border seeking political asylum. And listen, we don't want to do away with that. I think that's something where the United States has always said, hey, listen, if you are being persecuted in your country, this is a place where people have come since its very beginning to escape persecution. So we don't want to change that. But what we do want to do is to say, let's make it the same for everybody. I know Secretary Nielsen is also working with the governments in Guatemala, Honduras, and other Central American countries to make sure that they address issues about people leaving their countries. We need to be able to help and say, listen, the instability there leads to people wanting to come here. So I think there's some things that we can do there. But the law needs to be consistent. And if you look at the law and say, why is somebody from Mexico immediately deported and somebody from Central America not immediately deported? What it has been in the past is a situation, I believe, of distance and not turning them right back at the border and say, well, now you've got to march 1,000 miles back to the south again. So what does that mean? That means we have to make the law consistent and thoughtful, and we have to work with those countries and have agreements there to say, by the way, if your residents show up here in the United States, if they apply for asylum, and their asylum applications are rejected, that is, they're not allowed to come into the country because the asylum claims are not valid, then here's an agreement that we have with you for these individuals to go back. And, Secretary Nielsen is working on that right now to say, listen, we're going to process these folks, and if their claims of asylum are denied, we want to have an agreement with those countries to send them back. So I think you have to change the law, but you have to change the law in relation to an agreement with those Central American countries to make sure that those individuals can get back and that we don't have the issues that led to the law being what it is now, and that is just immediately deporting people back across the Mexican border, and then the humanitarian concerns that come with, well, how are they going to now, get back across that 1,000-mile distance across Mexico. And of course, Mexico has to be part of that too. So, I think this is coming more and more to light in people's minds. Both Mexico, because they understand what it means for them, Central American countries, and the United States law. So I think you have to have a threefold effort there: a formal agreement with Mexico concerning these individuals, both coming and if they're processed in Mexico and their claims are denied, what happens then to be able to get them back to their home countries? The home countries to help stem the flow of people trying to come here, and then the law in the United States.
Congressman, if we had a wall up right now that the president has been campaigning for some time, that you've not been able to secure the funding for in Congress, and the Senate is to blame for that also. If we had a wall right now, would that make a difference?
I think it would make the issue easier to handle when you have people coming to the border. I mean, securing the border is key, John, and in many areas there we've seen that the walls are very effective. And they're just building a wall, portions of the wall there in the San Diego area. As I talk to Border Patrol agents, they tell me unequivocally, they said, yes, the wall makes their job easier. But another thing that has to go along with the wall is you have to have more Border Patrol agents, because even with walls, people will try to go over, around, or under. So you have to have Border Patrol agents there. And you also have to have in other areas where walls don't work as effectively to use sensors. Those are, UAVs in the air, sensors on the ground. So it has to be a full suite of ways for us to be able to secure the, yes, the wall or a wall is an important part of how you secure the border. And you look anywhere else in the world where countries secure their borders, and walls are part of that.
I think people are looking at this, Congressman Wittman, Dr. Wittman, and it looks like an invasion coming into the country. Nobody is comfortable with it. I think it's really hurting the Democrats. But there's a lot of people saying that who is funding this? Like, who organized it? I mean, these people have to be fed, obviously. They have to have supplies, water. Like, who is funding this whole thing? There's trucks carrying them. We see it on TV. Somebody's got to be funding this. Do you have any idea?
There's a lot of assumptions or allegations about who's funding it, but you're right. You don't strike off on a 1,000-mile journey with just a backpack and say, hey, I expect that I'm going to, make it to my destination without any accommodations, without any food, without any shelter, and we see that I think it's hard to sustain that. So these individuals obviously are getting resources from somewhere. Some may have their own resources. Some maybe have been given resources from someone. It's not quite clear how that's happening, but there is certainly, I believe, a plan when you see thousands of people simultaneously strike out from their home countries and head towards the United States. There's some element of planning. There's some element of coordination there. Who's behind it, I think, still remains to be determined. But yes, it does take resources. It does take planning, and somewhere, in some shape or form, that has happened.
Congressman, let me ask you this: the evolving story of the Saudis. It's now clear this was a premeditated murder. This guy got chopped up and basically got out of there in some kind of doggy bags, and they buried him in the garden or something. I mean, the whole thing it's just a horrible situation. But look, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the administration's put a lot of faith in this guy. Jared Kushner has, and a lot of people are saying, maybe this guy's just incompetent, incapable of running the country. Everything he touches turns to crap, whether it's the Yemeni civil war, that's a disaster. The Gang of Four embargo against the state of Qatar, that backfired and blew up in their face. Qatar is better off today than they were. Now we've got this thing where they changed their story 9 times. What do we do here?
Well, John, as you point out, it's clear that Mr. Khashoggi was brutally murdered. It's clear that it was premeditated. It's clear that I think the Crown Prince knew about that. MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, they, I think, have a lot to answer for, and I think they have to be held accountable. Mm-hmm. So I do think that there has to be significant penalties that they suffer. I do think, too, the question that has to be asked is, does the United States believe that it can carry on a continued relationship with Saudi Arabia, which I do think we need to, but can that be with the Crown Prince? I think that's a pretty compelling question. I think the administration is going to have to ask that. I think Congress will eventually address that and ask that, too. You know, what will be the penalties to Saudi Arabia? Listen, I understand the impact of those contracts for what we're doing to supply military equipment to Saudi Arabia. I think Saudi Arabia can be a force that is an ally to us in the Middle East, but I don't think that it can be that type of ally that we want and that we need if this is how they're going to operate. I mean, we have principles in the United States that we stand by.
Right.
And our allies have to abide by those, and I just don't see Saudi Arabia doing that. You know, you point out the issue with Yemen too, and you and I have talked about that before. Those are all questions I think that come up in how we see Saudi Arabia operating in the region and how we see their policies being played out, and are they doing the things necessary in that region that create stability and that are working in the best interest of all involved, not just Saudi Arabia, but other allies in the Middle East. And listen, I understand what they're doing to push back against the Iranians, but are they doing things that in the long term are moving the Middle East in the right direction? I think those are questions that we have to ask from a foreign policy standpoint, and I think that U.S. policy towards Saudi Arabia, you know, needs to be directed by those, I think, very sobering issues that we have before us.
So it seems like, Congressman Wittman, we're in total agreement, and it seems like what you're saying is the best way to solve this is for Crown Prince MBS Mohammed bin Salman to maybe step aside for someone else, have his father put somebody else in there. Final question. I only have a half a minute, and I've got to get your website out. So very quickly, is there going to be a vote in Congress on our involvement in the Yemeni civil war and backing the Saudi Emirates coalition, yes or no?
John, I can't predict that because I don't know where the discussion is going to go overall with Saudi Arabia. But I would say that it will be part of the debate in Congress about what our policy is with Saudi Arabia and the conflict there in Yemen.
All right, I got to go. More information, robwittman.com, robwittman.com. Early voting has started in Virginia. Get out and get involved. Go to robwittman.com.